go ahead and get started with the 2024 Artists in Schools Academy presented by Bunnell Street Art Center in Homer. My name is Asia Freeman, and I am the coordinator of Artists in Schools for the Kenai Peninsula Borough and the artistic director at Bunnell Street Art Center. I am coming to you from the traditional lands of the Wiyot and Yurok people in Humboldt County today, where I'm visiting my sister. I'm just really grateful to be able to connect with all of you in what I consider my homelands of Alaska. This meeting is focused on it's the first of four, and it is focused on orientation to artists in schools, and it's an overview. And so joining me in presenting this meeting today is Laura Forbes from Alaska State Council on the Arts. Hey, Laura. And Melissa Shaginoff, who is an artist and curator at this moment currently in Montreal. I'm going to invite Laura and Melissa to introduce themselves in that order. And then Melissa is going to guide us through a beautiful piece that is an art piece from a recent nationally touring project. So Laura, tell us a little bit about the amazing work you do supporting programs like Bunnell's and in many other places across Alaska.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be joining today. And I am actually joining today from Sukpiat Aluktek homelands in Kodiak Island. Usually, most of my time is spent in Anchorage, which is where the Alaska State Council on the Arts is based. I am from Kenai, Alaska, also Denina Ishnana.
Melissa, I mentioned as an artist who, among her many hats as artist and curator, has also been a teaching artist and worked with Bunnell Street Art Center for many years.
Yeah, Asia asked me if I would come and introduce my How to Be a Good Guest art piece that was in protection. It's a little bit more of a social practice art, and yeah, it's a 11 by 17 poster, and it's a Mad Libs to sort of situate yourself on the land and really kind of think about who you are and how you relate to the land, and also to while acknowledging indigenous stewardship and indigenous histories, and also questioning yourself on what sort of things that you need to learn about those things, and also reflecting on how learning those notions can bring a bit more depth to how you relate to the land. And so I made it basically like a Mad Libs. Indigenous introductions are very important in cultures across the world. It's important to sort of talk about who you are and where you come from, out of this idea of this is how we relate to each other, is first by knowing who each other are. I during the pandemic, I mostly, did work that was facilitating like conversations around land acknowledgement and decolonization. And uh, the whole workshop was mainly us just introducing each other and questioning each other, and talking about different things like, what is decolonization? What is land acknowledgement? Why is it important? And also how can we challenge the hollowness of something that is just a statement, and move it towards action. And so this is a piece that is meant to make you think about those things. And I think that it's something that can be very surface, but can also kind of like live pretty deeply within you. because not everybody has a land that they're from. Not everybody, considers the place they're from the place that they're from, the place that they're responsible towards. In Otna language and Dene languages, we say Nait Dinyana Kayak Sinsiaren, which means, it means I'm from Nait Dinyana, but it mostly means it translates to something deeper than just a location. It's like it's what I'm responsible towards. And so if we spend the time to really understand what it is that we're responsible towards, maybe there's a deeper relationship that we can form and deeper work that we can all do together. Why don't we go around the room and actually just answer a couple questions, just maybe what's your name, like where you're from, and what is it that you do, not necessarily for work, but what it is that you do, for yourself and for what makes you who you are.
Who I am and what matters to me is for myself and for everyone that I'm with, helping them see their potential. Dixie's our school nurse. She's kind of my sister. I don't have a sister, but she says my superpower is helping kids figure out who they are and find their potential. Like I cry when she tells me that.
I was born and raised in Anchor Point, Alaska. I went to Phoenix and studied Harley Davidson mechanics. And then I ended up coming back to Homer and working at the Honda shop, working on outboards and snow machines and four-wheelers until my children were born. And I have 4 kids under 12 at home right now. Yeah. I am a painter. I've always been a painter and an artist. I just didn't pursue that in my early 20s, but I'm more exploring it and building it now. So,
Sure, my name is Julie. My family's from Pennsylvania. I grew up on a pig farm there and feel very fondly toward that spot where my mom still is. And my dad passed away when I was 14, and at that point, it made me question like, okay, so what's this all about? Like, what's the point? What do I want out of my life? Because it could be long or it could be short. And I decided, or I feel like if I leave it a little better than I found it, that's what's important to me. So I teach, and I teach yoga, and I do Thai massage.
My family and I are from Seward, and I probably feel connected to this place more than anywhere I've lived because I've lived here the longest of any place I've lived, and I raised my children here, so I just feel a very strong connection to this part of Alaska. I feel like there's many different Alaskas, and kind of, I'm a coastal Alaskan, and I go to other parts of Alaska and I feel like I'm in a foreign country or something. It's a different Alaska, but I just love the rainforest coastline of Alaska. Been a lifelong musician as well. And I guess I just really believe strongly in the power of sound and music to connect people and to even sort of heal people and be very therapeutic and cathartic and also just very gratifying to create music. I think both myself and kids I've worked with can get a lot of joy and gratification out of creating something musical. So,
Hey guys, my name is Brianna, and I am coming to you from Homer, which is within the tribal jurisdiction of the Delchic Village tribe, and also home to Dena'ina and Sukbiak folks. I am joined by my daughters here, currently picking out crusty Play-Doh from their toys as I listen in. I'm an artist. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, mostly painting and performance work. And I've particularly been turning into my art making practice while letting my motherhood journey kind of inform myself and my relationship with my girls. And so that's been a lot of fun and has felt really meaningful and vulnerable, which has allowed me the ability to connect to my community, which has been really important to me. I come from Maine, and I'm a member of the Chickasaw tribe that is down in Ada, Oklahoma. And my mom was born in Maine, dad was born in Oklahoma, found Alaska and felt like home right away.
I recently moved to Homer last year from the Seattle region, but I was only in Seattle for a very short time. I was actually kind of recently talking to a person about the idea of sense of place um, and belonging to a place, and that's something that in the past 10 years I've just sort of have had difficulty with myself because I've lived in 8 different states in a pretty short amount of time. So it's an intriguing journey of trying to figure out what that means to me currently, and especially being in such a new place yet again. But I'm really hopeful that Homer will be a place that we get to sort of set some roots and really sort of get to know.
Originally from Scotland, and I grew up in Australia, and I've been in Alaska for 26 years. I used to live up by Denali. I lived in St. Michael for a couple of years, and then I've been in Homer for almost 17 years. And I have a degree in drums and percussion. That's why I came to the US. So I'm a drummer, and I also am a harpist, and I'm a trained healing harpist, and I've played to people bedside who are dying and in hospitals. And I'm also a trained sound healer. And I have like a native hoop drum, and I do just intuitive singing to that, and do love to play to people. And I'm also part of a duo that performs and writes music in Homer. So I live in Homer.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for leading that beautiful introduction. I guess I would just return to my motivation in inviting you to open this space with an introduction that's grounded in tradition, in your ancestry, and in cultural practice, which is a really critical part of a strong artists in schools program. At Bunnell, we think and value cultural responsive projects, and something that I've been so long shaped by is the really conscious and warm way in which you open a space. And by sharing this piece, How to Be a Good Guest, I just want to remind artists who are often visiting communities around Alaska to be mindful of a traditional way of making your introduction generous, and making space for your students and your colleagues to share some deep values about how they live in relationship to land. It's inextricable, right, from cultural identity. And there are so many ways that it could happen. It could happen through writing, obviously. It can happen through speaking. And if it can happen through speaking and writing, it could happen through music. It could happen through composition. It could happen in ways I'm sure I'm not even imagining. And here it happens in Melissa's work through visual art. So I think that's just a really exciting invitation to think about how, as presenters and artists and teachers, we can be culturally responsive. Laura and I are going to orient you to artisan schools in the broad sense, because artisan schools is a trademark program of the Alaska State Council on the Arts. And so Laura and I each have a role in guiding artists through this process. I'll let Laura describe the way that she may work with artists or schools. And then I'll talk about how I do that on a local level, because either one of these doorways, if you will, might be how you become involved as an artist or a teacher, a classroom teacher, or a teaching artist. Laura, thank you for stepping up to this space with me to describe the role that you have with Alaska State Council on the Arts. In particular, this program and how an artist may end up speaking with you and working with you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say what a great sort of transition into some of the nitty-gritty of this particular program, which is, got its structure and its roots, but also like at its core, teaching artistry and sort of the basis of the structure and all of the nitty-gritty we're going to get a little bit into tonight. I just want to ground us in the basis of and part of the reason why I think cultural competency and cultural responsiveness is so important, a conversation within the scope of teaching artistry and the Artisan Schools program, because it really is an opportunity for someone who has a unique perspective on their own experience, on where we are in the world, on the practice of a particular art form, our own background and communities of cultures that we come from, to walk into a classroom and be sort of not only a teacher and a classroom leader, but someone who leads students to reflection on their own cultural background and their own artistic background and their own community background and their own lived experience and their prior knowledge, and to be able to grow in the ways in which they can express those things in the world. And my role is working with the statewide Artists in Schools grant program. So we make a grant to the Bunnell Street Arts Center, which leverages those grant funds to teach within the structure of artisan schools in the region of the Kenai Peninsula Borough School District. I also work with not only the granting program, but the statewide teaching artist roster. Maite Agopian, who is pictured here working with students, is one of our statewide teaching artist roster artists. And so that's kind of my role, is engaging with this kind of program or project across the state.
What we want to introduce to you is the idea that there's two ways that you may enter into artisan schools teaching or presenting as a classroom teacher, bringing the artist in. If you are in the Kenai Peninsula Borough, most likely you would hear about Bunnell's program through local media, or a teacher might have heard you're an artist and say, "Hey, do you want to get involved in teaching as an artist in schools?" And in that case, you are going to need to be a part of the state teaching artist roster. And that's something we're going to show you in the course of this workshop, what that is and how to apply. At the same time, by joining that roster, you may teach in a Homer area school. That could be, in fact, as far north as Sterling and in Seward, across the bay in Tyonek or Vosnesenka, in essence, anywhere in the Kenai Peninsula borough. Or you might be invited or apply to the state teaching artist roster and therefore be invited to come out to Bethel or Kaptovik. So in that instance, when you're outside of the Kenai Peninsula borough, you're not being contracted by Bunnell. You're being contracted by a local school, and that school seeks funding directly from the state office that Laura would be responsible for working with that school and that you as an artist to provide that program. So there's these two programs, and that's what we're trying to show you. There's these core similarities, and that is what we're going to talk about. So I'll pause there for a minute, Laura.
So the core similarities. So artists in schools, there's all kinds of school residencies, right? There is a named program, Artists in Schools, that originated with the Alaska State Council on the Arts as one of our earliest arts education programs. And it has always had some of the same core elements. And whether you're working with Asia and the Bunnell program in the Kenai Peninsula Borough, or you're approached by a school or a school district or an arts organization in another part of the state to work with an Artists in Schools residency, there's going to be 4 sort of core components. One is going to be arts instruction between a teaching artist and students in your specific art form. 2 is going to be professional development for school staff and faculty. That is increasing teacher confidence and competence to teach in and through the arts and cultures once you're no longer at the school as a resident artist. 3 is going to be community engagement. That is including community in a variety of ways in the project of the residency, through celebration, through sharing the art form, but really sort of including people beyond the students and teachers directly engaged with the residency instruction. And then the 4th is going to be reflection and evaluation and advocacy and sort of celebration of the project after it's been completed, and reporting, right? That often comes in the frame of reporting, which is something that is basically telling the story of what happened and what did we learn, and what can we do differently or more of, or again, right? So those are the kind of bases of an Artists in Schools sort of program. Schools seek artists, as Asia has described. There is usually one, at least, in-school coordinator person who is kind of the key partner to a teaching artist in accomplishing these things. When you're working outside of the Bunnell program, I am your contact, and I would imagine Asia is sort of a great listening ear and advisor in any case. And generally speaking, the structure of these residencies as described by Bunnell, or working directly with a school outside of the Bunnell program, a lot of the logistics are going to be similar, but there's going to be differences because in Alaska, there are 54 school districts, and the policies and procedures and sort of areas of emphasis and curricula across the state is different, right? So some things are always going to be pretty the same, those 4 components, and some of those key elements, and some things are going to be different in the way school local education agencies work, right?
Thank you, Laura. I think it's just important to know that you should always ask a lot of questions. And what we like to do, both Laura and I, is be very transparent, like with what does the contract look like? What are some of those expectations? And that's the kind of thing that we want to outline to you here. The most important thing is to be able to be hired to join this program and for teachers to find you, right? Schools. So applying to the state teaching artist roster, that's going to be the final of 4 of these sessions. Everything that we want to share with you will kind of lead you in your preparedness for that. Other things that you can do, though, is have a flyer or business card that you just create and you can share with people that you might meet in community. It could be at a First Friday art opening. It could be at some kind of a school open house, which your children or relatives are involved with. And just having that ready information, whether it's a website or some kind of a flyer to share, is a really great on-ramp to becoming involved in a school in your region. And I think that's particularly important that kids have the opportunity to experience teaching artists from their own community, because those become really long relationships and role models. Some families don't have artists in them, and it's a great way for kids to imagine the possibilities. And the other thing that I really like for artists to do is to just send me a little bio. So as soon as you know that it's something you might like to do, be on the state teaching artist roster, you can go ahead and send a little bio, and we will just work toward the steps that you need for preparedness, for readiness. That little bio might describe something about you, the media that you teach, and what you might envision as like a very summary description of the artists in schools residency, which is what we call it, that you might offer in the school. Eventually, that it becomes, as you could say, it sort of blooms like a seed into a lesson plan, which is something that we want you to have prepared for when you go to a school, something that you can offer to teachers to guide you through your teaching artist residency, but also to leave behind so that the learnings can continue. Every different kind of media, all different kinds of art are absolutely welcome and important. It's very important for students in Ketchimek-Silo to learn Chinese ink brush painting, and children of Fireweed Academy to learn how to make traditional Asian windsocks. I mean, any number of different things can happen. And our goal is not to get teachers to teach certain things, teaching artists, I mean, but really to expand the possibilities for the student and all the different ways that they might be able to learn through the arts, with their bodies, with their eyes, through speech, through movement, coordination, and brain development. Laura mentioned the in-school coordinator, and I just wanted to invite you, Laura, to just kind of jump off on that idea a little bit more deeply, to express what an important relationship that is. And I know that a couple of the people in this room are people who have worked in that role. And I just want to say, you are so priceless. You are so, so valuable. It can be hard work coordinating a whole bunch of schedules, figuring out the budget, asking the questions. You're priceless. You actually make this happen. We couldn't do that without you.
Facts. That is true. And you know, the best case scenario is that for and so in some instances, like Bunnell, there are really strong networks of support already existing in the Kenai Peninsula Borough. Bunnell does a lot of, support and guidance around sort of how do we get together teacher and teaching artist to get started planning, and what are some of the challenges we run into, and just supporting all of that logistic process. In some school districts in the state that have a lot of experience similarly and that partner often with local arts agencies like a Bunnell Street Arts Center, there are networks of liaisons who are sort of already identified at each school to connect with their local arts agency to when there is something going on, whether it's an artist in schools residency or another kind of program. Often those folks will be your in-school coordinators. But as you see here, it can be a principal, it can be a teacher, it could be a parent volunteer that's helping to plan and organize and get people involved with the process. But if you are not sure from the state perspective, if you're approached by an individual school who's not affiliated with an independent program like Bunnell's, and you're not sort of sure who your main point of contact is, if you're making a list of questions to ask when you're beginning to approach artists in schools residencies and sort of building that practice in your own artist practice, that would be question number one. Who is going to be my in-school coordinator, and how will we work together? Will we plan? Can we set up a meeting to plan? What is your school like? Is it someone else? That is really going to be the person who sees the project through, your partner in the school, who knows all the ins and outs of the schedule, knows all the ins and outs of the student population and the building, who knows, is it the school admin I need to talk to about supplies? Is there someone else? Is that person going to be the principal who has more of an ability to sort of make things happen because they're a school site leader, right? Or is it someone who's going to need to go to other folks for authorization for certain things? That person is really the partner, but on the school side with any successful artists in schools residency. Asia, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think just that's great. I think that's a really great point. It's if they're not walking around with a badge on their chest or a tattoo on their forehead, right? And you're just stepping into this. And so you want to know, who do I work with? And that is, you don't want to wait until your residency starts and you're wondering how to get some help or support, because it sometimes happens that people just don't have the clarity on who that person is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's critical.
And things can move quickly. So there may be multiple people that you're working with. There should be someone who is able to kind of see the project through, or make sure that you are connected to the next person, to the next person, to the next person, or from planning to reporting all the way through the project. That's something to really just stay focused on, because coming back to sort of that invitation piece of things, in many ways there has to be an agreement of, a teaching artist coming into this space that's a very structured space, and if there's someone who can help navigate those policies and procedures and processes, it's going to be a more successful residency all the way around.
After a school has expressed an interest to Bunnell or to an artist, in having a residency, they will fill out an online application, which you can see at Bunnell's website. They will identify 1, 2, 3 artists who are of interest to them. And often at that point, I play matchmaker. If you are on the roster, I can recommend you. Then we will try to schedule that residency. We try to do it 4 weeks ahead of time. Sometimes it's a little shorter, sometimes it's a little longer. We want the school to be able to put it in their newsletter, to be able to work with the school community and the parents to maybe weave in the residency itself to something meaningful for the school. It could range from being a mural to a performance. It could happen associated with an event or a academic theme that is the subject of that, time period at the school. Spring Sea Week, for example. Then we will develop a memorandum of agreement. And basically what this is like a contract. The school district won't call it a contract for legal reasons, but it's a memorandum of understanding that clearly delineates who our partners are, including the school, the artist, the Nell Street Art Center, and the Kenai Peninsula Borough's assistant superintendent. All of these parties must agree. Going back to the top of the contract, just because I want you to really understand, it's fairly simple. It's really straightforward. It exists on Bunnell's website, so you can refer to it. But it's important that you understand there's clear opportunities for the school to say, we want a 2-week residency, which means that you'd be teaching for 40 hours and have 40 hours of preparation time that are paid for. We don't want you to overwork, and we don't want you to under-expect what your obligation is. So it's not at all unusual to have 40 hours of lesson planning, ordering materials, setting up, cleaning up, reporting, etc., and to have at least 40 hours over the course of 2 weeks teaching hands-on instructional time with students. We have recommended numbers of students per each 40-hour, 80-hour, 120-hour unit. And so I'm just making it really clear, because sometimes artists are nervous and they work themselves too hard in trying to plan things down to the last detail, or they don't give themselves enough time to prepare and clean up and do all the things that are part of each residency. The MOA also really clearly outlines what your pay is, and it makes it clear that the school district is providing a 100% match for what Bunnell is putting up. What Bunnell is putting up is coming largely from the State Arts Council, but it's also coming from private and business corporate sponsorships, which are supporting the Artists in the Schools program, including the Kenai Fine Arts Center, Almost Drug and Hardware, Global Credit Union, and so forth. So the school puts up 50%, Bunnell matches that. In the contract, we have the school agree that they will either provide up to $250 worth of materials, as the artist has outlined on a materials sheet, or the school will reimburse the artist, payable to Bunnell. And that's the method that we typically prefer, just to make sure that you're not stuck using supplies that just happen to be on hand and not what you really need to get your residency done right. Bunnell will provide reimbursements for transportation based on like gas receipts. And sometimes the school is remote and has more that they need to provide. And so these are like these little other lines that we put out really clearly in the contract. Maybe the school is providing lodging because they're a rural community. It's in a hotel. It might even be in the school. It may be in somebody's private home. all of those things are things that you'll know in advance and will be clearly described in this agreement. And as that agreement is evolving, you, in fact, are the first person to sign that as an artist. The second person to sign it is the school coordinator, myself, and then the district superintendent. So it goes through this kind of cascade of review, during which time all of the questions are really important, and there's absolutely no dumb questions. So obviously I'm spotting this presentation with some colorful images of all the kinds of things that can happen in residencies, including partner dance for middle schoolers. And underneath all of this is some really important nitty-gritty that we want you to understand. Laura, do you want to talk a little bit about budgeting in residency?
Yeah. So this is such a great set of insights, and this sort of relates to what Asia is talking about in the last slide as far as coming to agreement. One of the things we sometimes when you're approached by a school, there may be an expectation that a teaching artist would work with the entire school for a large elementary school in a period of 2 weeks, which is not necessarily a feasible scenario. One of the things we really encourage in the planning and conversation is being realistic about what is appropriate to the art form and to the teaching artist experience. Sometimes maybe you're only working with 3rd through 5th grade in a particular school because that's the right number and it's the right developmental age. And it's potentially possible in the time frame that, for example, a school organization is able to budget for. I will also say that if you are sort of building a new teaching artist practice, it may take you a couple of residencies to really understand your own capacities for how many, what age range, what do I need to practice more, what do I need to develop some new concepts around. So I also want to say that if things go not as you expect the first couple of times around, that is not to be unexpected. And when you're creating with a whole group of people, especially if that whole group of people, for example, doesn't necessarily have the same ability to use their hands and fingers, or may or may not have ever been exposed to the dance that you're bringing them to teach in the past, it's going to take a learning curve. So I just want to encourage you to be conservative in how you budget your time, how you plan your residencies, and including how you budget for something. In the Bunnell program, there's sort of a specific structure, right? Already identified and with already a great deal of communication with the school district and the schools in the school district about what to expect for various sort of shapes and sizes of residencies. Outside of the Bunnell program, unless you're working with another independent program or a school district that has a very highly developed artisan schools program in their school district, a lot of this will be sort of up to the artists and the schools to sort of negotiate and figure out. I am a resource for doing that if that's something that you need support with. But also there are good models like Bunnell and how those residencies get set up. But essentially the things that you would need to budget into an artisan schools residency would be obviously artist fee, potentially travel. And one of the things to be really clear about is who is arranging that travel and how is that travel getting paid for. Supplies, similarly, who is purchasing the supplies and how are those supplies getting to the place where they need to be? Because in a lot of places in Alaska, there isn't necessarily somewhere to get even some of the, sort of basis supplies that you might need. And then an artisan schools residency might include sort of coordinator fees or administrative fees at some level as part of a cash budget. Pretty simple. Those sort of key things in most cases. Outside of that, if particularly there is travel, a school or organization working with a school and a teaching artist will want to come to agreement on some of those things that Asia mentioned. Housing, per diem or food, right? Those things are arranged outside of the artisan schools grant application cash budget. And I'm talking about this from the perspective of applying for a grant for support. But even if you're not applying for a grant, even if the school is paying directly or a parent-teacher organization is paying directly or a school partner is paying directly for a residency outside of ASCA or Bunnell, those are things that upfront you'll want to include in your planning and in your budget. But from the artisan schools perspective, artist fee, supplies, travel, and then sort of administrative costs, those are going to be the key elements of a cash budget. Aisha, did you want to give any perspective on this image that we're looking at right now as related to Bunnell's program?
I guess, I'm the sort of person that faced with like a bunch of numbers like this could start to get a little anxiety right away about like, what am I responsible for? What do I need to know? And I guess all I really want you to be concerned about is asking any questions that you have. The fact is, in Bunnell's model, we're trying to cover all those bases and outline things so that there's nothing you might be putting forward as a direct expense for yourself, except for filling your tank of gas if you're driving, buying your art materials. Both of those things will be reimbursed for. Maybe some groceries if you're flying into a village, that will be also outlined in the contract as a per diem that you'd be reimbursed for. And it's all to say that these are all the costs we anticipate, and exactly what might be needed and where will depend a little bit on the situation. Is it remote? Is it not remote? Mm-hmm. So we're there for you to make sure you are adequately compensated and supported. It just happens in a few different ways. Yes. Did you have a question, Susan? Sorry.
Yeah.
And Laura.
A couple of times you guys mentioned the administrative fees. So what would be an example of an additional administrative fee that wasn't in those other categories?
That's a great question, Susan. And that's mainly at the sort of from the grant applicant perspective, right? So when an organization like Bunnell applies to the Alaska State Council on the Arts for an Artisan Schools grant to support their program, I would expect to see administrative costs. In the instance of even an individual school applicant to the grant program, and a lot of times negotiation sort of directly between a school and an artist are going to happen with individual school programs or with someone who's coordinating the program at a district level, sort of a point of contact like Asia or a school arts and culture, a district arts and culture coordinator person. But in the individual school applications, it might be that school district has that teachers or principals or school admin can receive extra duty fees, right? Like a coach or some other situation. That is absolutely applicable to the Artists in Schools program. And, you know, again, that in-school coordinator person is going to be doing a lot. In the Bunnell program, I know, Asia, you talked about sort of leaning into principals, really doing a lot of that in-school coordination to take some of the pressure off of um, teacher folks. But it is also possible for there to be, for example, extra duty contract fees for an in-school coordinator for an Artists in Schools program for an individual school.
There's two other things that you implied, which I think are really important. Bunnell's fees are a baseline, but in fact, an artist can say, this is what I charge. And a school can say, I'll pay it or I won't pay it. You know, I mean, it's like nobody wants to really tell you what you're worth, but an artist can say, this is my fee is, and I will work hard to support you. One of the ways that becomes really important, Laura mentioned that sometimes schools will really try to get you to see every one of their students. And say it's a big school like West Homer Elementary with close to 300 kids. That even if you were scheduled for 2 weeks, you'd have a very busy schedule. So artists have said to me, I'll do that school if I'm paid for, and I'll work a long day so I can see every one of those kids for 2 weeks, but I won't require a higher rate of pay. And I'm like, okay, let's talk. What do you need to make this work? And the results of those conversations have lifted the floor in terms of artist wage. And so it's very important for us to learn and work together. The other thing that's really key is that you may say, I'm the kind of music I'm interested in teaching, in music composition is really most appropriate to 4th and 5th graders. And that's just fine. A school might be a, K2 or 3-6 or junior high or what have you. They might have a hard time like being the one to assert that not every kid will be attending this program. But if an artist says, I'm willing to work with all of your 2nd graders, it could be a very special thing that in their final year at Paul Banks Elementary School, every kid gets to participate in Artists in Schools. So it's a program reserved for 2nd graders, and it has a high degree of support, and it works really well because they're not trying to churn every kid through the program. So those are things that artists can help really shape in terms of the design of their residencies. Something that's required both at Bunnell and around the state in various potential ways or workshops for teachers. It's something we want to do prior to the residency so the teachers are really familiar with the lesson plan. At minimum, it could be a Zoom meeting. I mean, if you're going out to Tyonek, we don't expect you to go on Friday and stay for the weekend in order to start your unit on Monday, right? So maybe you're going to Zoom in, and that's just fine. You'll get to meet the shop teacher, who's also the science teacher, and the art teacher, who's also the principal, and the 2nd grade teacher. I mean, it's just, you get to see like, okay, this is how the school community works. What are their concerns? What are the opportunities? You share with them your lesson plan. You activate the teacher so they can really provide support. You might think that my schedule is looking really busy. Maybe I'll just not draw attention to the fact that we haven't discussed the teaching artists, the workshop for teachers. But I'm going to tell you that it helps so much to make your time in the classroom more efficient, more clear and focused, more calm and collected, because teachers just need to know how they can support. And if they don't, they might even be apt to walk out of the classroom and just think that you're in charge. You want to activate them. There is no world in which it's okay for the teachers to leave the classroom and leave it in your hands. But some of these things just need to be really front loaded and clear so that expectations and comfort for teachers in having a role in supporting you is really made evident. Susan?
Two thoughts. Do you find that the school coordinator or the principal, if they're looking to have an artist in the school, supports that they're going to get all the affected or all the staff together for that meeting? Like, is that well supported? If they're looking to get an artist in the school, like they're going to be like, yeah, we're going to have everybody at this meeting? Or do you sometimes get situations where, you know, someone's like, yeah, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to the meeting. And the principal shrugs and doesn't care if they come to the meeting.
I am going to answer this question very practically, which is yes, as you described.
Okay.
There are going to be a variety of different situations. There's I think two main functions of the workshop for teachers. One, Asia just described really clearly, which is introducing ideas that are not only potentially new to students, but also new to teachers, right? Who probably are not, who probably themselves have anxieties and not as much opportunity to practice in a variety of art forms as we might all like. So having the opportunity to introduce what it is that you're bringing into the classroom and having discussions about student prior knowledge and the school community and what it looks like, and how to accomplish whatever the sort of project goals are together in advance, super helpful. The second piece is that with the Artists in Schools model, we recognize that in most school districts across the state, there are not art specialists, and certainly not art specialists across every art form: theater, dance, music, visual arts, media arts. And classroom teachers teach a lot of different stuff. And what can we do to help support teachers to feel more confident and competent to perhaps in the future use an arts technique, even if they're not an art specialist or a teaching artist or an artist themselves? What can we do to support teachers to feel more ready to use the arts in their classroom beyond an artist residency? The reality is there is a lot of pressure on school sites, on school districts. But that's why the planning of the residency is so important, and why I continually reiterate with the grant applications that that is the purpose of an Artists in Schools residency that is supported by Artists in Schools grants. Those are the components that make a competitive application. When you get to a community, you may be working with the entire school staff, which may be an entire school staff of like 6, right? There may be opportunities to invite community into a workshop for teachers. But the reality is, in some school communities, there may be some hesitancy for a variety of reasons. Sorry, that was maybe a longer answer than.
No, super helpful. My other question was when it says full participation of all teachers. So let's say, you know, it was something where you're going to just work with the 5th and 6th graders at a school. If you're having those meetings ahead of time, would you most likely have, you know, like the Zoom meeting, for example, if at a more remote school with just the 5th and 6th grade staff and teachers, or would that be with just the affected teachers, the ones who are directly involved? Because otherwise I was like, yeah, well, the kindergarten teacher is going to be like, why are you making me come to this meeting?
Exactly.
Okay.
And you really don't want to have any
Yeah.
teachers or class groups participating that aren't really excited about being in the
that makes
residency.
more sense.
And so again, by anticipating the scheduling of this, it's one more way to make sure who's, you know, going to be committed to this program.
And as far as the what this looks like in schools and communities across the state outside of the Vanilla program, which really is a, you know, very focused, which is a huge blessing, right? Um, it can look a variety of different ways. It could be a very similar preparatory workshop. It could be something midway through the residency to talk about how teachers might deploy this in their teaching practice going forward. It could happen in a variety of different ways, depending on the context and what's important. But I think, as Asia confirmed and affirmed, kind of keeping it focused to what is the real intent of this workshop. Is it preparing folks for the project that's going to occur? Is it about the lasting impact of the residency? What is the purpose of that teacher workshop?
Thank you, Laura. Such good points. Further to making efficient and really clear and well supported. The residency ideally has a dedicated studio space where the artist is working in the school. It could be the library, it could be the gym, it could be an art room. The obvious downsides of the gym, which is usually also the cafeteria, is you might find artists wiping down tables to get ready for the art class that's happening right after lunch. If you know you're going to be in a gym, you also want to make sure you have a parent crew who's going to sweep and do those kinds of things so that you can focus on setting up and teaching. If you don't ask enough questions, in other words, you can really end up grinding. It's hard, to kind of uphold a very high standard of student engagement when you're, working on dirty tables and trying to do the whole thing. But in a lot of rural and remote schools, the space options are really limited, and so you just want to know going into it what it is and who's going to help you make it work, because it can work in so many different ways, and that's important. In very rural communities, the school might be a bit like a community center, and it may be a great opportunity to have more family or parent engagement that is related to facilitating setup and sharing and even workshops. So I think that related to this also is, if you say you're Michelle and you're living in Homer and you want to teach a harp, workshop in Nikiski, it's a big drive. You may be willing, and the school may have a fine private bedroom in a teacher's home where you can stay, or maybe they offer a hotel room, which is great. And so you're able to go through that residency in like a 5-day period, or go home for the weekend and then go back. And that's how it works. Or you might say, and this is a really viable option, can I come for 2 days a week for 4 weeks and have one overnight? Do you know what I mean? Something like this. Those sorts of flexibilities exist, and it's all about sustainability for the artist and for the school. So you should propose your preferred schedule, and the school can say, we can't do it. We can't do it. And they're happy to do it if they know that it works better for you, or that it's not feasible, and at least you've tried. Another aspect of time management that many artists have underscored is, say you're meeting with 2nd through 6th graders for your artists in schools unit, and you have the same basic lesson plan. Well, obviously they're going to learn at different rates, and you're trying to track that across multiple different classrooms, printing multiple copies of your lesson plan for each class, bringing one of those copies and making notations on how you're moving through that so that you can track. The next time you are in that classroom, you can say, oh, I see that we made it to page 2, or we didn't get past the first half of page 1 on my lesson plans. It's just something that's very handy for you, a little a little notebook. I mean, it's not easy to flip between student, different student groups. And sometimes in a small school, they're all in the same room together. But those are things that by asking questions, you can prepare for in advance and really feel that you have some adaptations set up to help you get through this as comfortably as possible.
There's a teaching artist on the statewide teaching artist roster named Shayla Dobson, who does this very cool thing with her lesson plans where she will sort of set up her lesson plan and then she'll essentially sort of leave space for herself to sort of do what Asia has just described, like journal for each class in advance or after the fact, or as she's going that she's working with. And it's such a great sort of idea because not only does it give her like that progression for each thread that she's weaving together into this school residency across a variety of classrooms, and a record of what she did for next time, depending on the students that she's working with. But it also is something that then she copies and hands to the teachers for those classrooms so that they can see documented their students' work as well and have a guide if they did want to try similar kind of lessons or projects going forward. And just handwritten, easy, in the moment notes about what is accomplished and what changed and what adaptations came up within the scope of a lesson. And then the other thing I just want to say about time management, sometimes it's helpful to be conservative in your planning. It's also helpful to have a teaching artist toolbox where if everybody accomplishes the thing really quickly, you either know what your next step in a project could be, or you have available in a classroom simple exercises and adaptations that will become your toolbox, right? And I come from a performing arts background of teaching artistry, and that's something I learned really early on working in classrooms as a teaching artist or working in youth theater experiences. You may be surprised that you have not filled all the time. It seems shocking that you wouldn't have filled the time because it feels like so much happens and so much gets planned. But sometimes you don't. And one of the things I encourage folks to do is sort of build your own little toolbox to be able to pull something out when things are either going sideways or you make all the progress in the world in one session, right?
Such good points. In week 3 of this training, when we're working with Charlene Klein, and she's kind of like the Shayla Dobson of Homer. Shayla has been doing artists in schools for so many years. She's such a pro. She works at different kinds of schools, all sorts of different kinds of media, and she just really has so much background. She's comfortable. What are the things that make you comfortable? These are the things that we're speaking to, and Charlene will speak about that in week 3. I just wanted to let you know that, kind of packing in a very broad overview here. And there's so much, each one of these slides is a kind of rabbit hole. And not only will the slideshow itself be available to you, so everything we've said and the little cues that are in there and those links will be hot so that you can utilize them. You don't have to be taking notes on every single thing. You can be just listing your questions if you want, so that just can help you in planning your own residencies in the future. I don't know how much we need to say about the contractual commitment, the example of a 2-week residency. We put it out there because it's very typical. I feel like we talked about this a little bit, but mostly it's just a reminder that in an 80-hour commitment of 2 weeks, half of that will be student contact time, instructional hours, what we call that. including things like a teacher's workshop. And the other half of that will be things like the prep, the cleanup, the lesson planning, the sharing, everything that's in and around to support that residency. It does not mean teaching for 2 solid weeks from 8:30 in the morning till 3:30 when school gets out. It should actually look more like 4 or 5 hours of teaching, and the rest is prep and support and outside of class time. I put the slide in about metalsmithing with Art Canninger because this is an interesting situation. It's just a reminder that some art media take tremendous investment. Jim talked about getting, hoping to have a bunch of drums, or maybe you go to a school that has a bunch of guitars. Obviously, that would be amazing. And at some point that has to happen for students to learn about guitar or drumming or metalsmithing. The school needs to make a big investment. And we have done things at Bunnell, like really double what we pay for materials in these instances, so certain media aren't persecuted just because they require so much more investment. Metalsmithing is something that is, has some specialized tools, just like guitars and drums. And whereas some materials budgets for dance or music might be really very small, other times they're going to be big, and we understand that in the grand scheme of things. We want to support all kinds of media. Talk about sharing, Laura, the final activity of each residency.
Sure. Really just to say, this is largely driven by the project and by the art media, right? But it can look a huge host of a variety of different ways. Could be a celebration within the scope of an open house, something existing within the school schedule. Often these are not, most often these are not formal sort of put on a play kinds of things. I'm just using that as an example. Although, that kind of performance presentation is also things that we've seen. If there's, for example, a high school class working to develop a particular production. But most often these are going to be less formal. They're going to take a variety of shapes. Often it's very effective if these can be embedded in something already existing within the school schedule. They can also help sort of bring the community together. We know that sometimes school facilities may not be everybody's happiest place, right? And where the sharing experience, the celebration experience comes in, is such a great opportunity for parents and family and the broader school community to hear and see the creative, expressive work of their students, and to hear those students articulate their residency experience or what it's like to work with a particular artist. We've seen sort of gallery walks within a school facility for the creation of a visual art. We've seen the unveiling of an artwork as a sharing activity that everybody is invited to. We've seen performances within classrooms and in larger facilities where older kids perform for younger kids. We've seen a whole host of different ways for this to happen. But the other piece of this is really giving parents, teachers, students an opportunity to celebrate a project completed, which, like schooling as a process, doesn't always give you those moments very easily, right?
Yeah.
And those moments of celebration also are a great opportunity to invite, for example, school board members or legislators or press into a school community to also celebrate impactful learning and really um, give people an opportunity to come around their student population in the sharing of a project completed or unveiled or something, a shared endeavor that everybody can be really happy about, and have lots of really good conversations about the learning, right?
It's so neat.
And make sure to invite Benel.
It's so true. Please invite us. Schools usually forget to invite us, and I'll get some little, you know, it'll be a parent or somebody who will mention, I'll be like, oh my gosh. And then it's like, which one of us staff is going to run out there, take some pictures, document it. Fortunately, we've got a bunch of parents on staff. And so we're clued in and often have that nimbleness, but it's just really important because those might be the best pictures that we have to share in our annual report or to our legislators that year. It's a fall festival at the school, or it's an open house and there's like hot dogs and students are giving, the school community tours of their mural. Maybe it's the school as Laura pointed out, looking like a gallery displaying the metalwork that they've made, and it's just, they're really beautiful, important opportunities.
As far as an arts learning experience, the opportunity for children, students, youth, people who are learning a new skill, the opportunity to talk about that learning is part of the learning process, right? That reflection and being able to articulate their skills and knowledge, that means that it's going to stay with them forever and ever and ever and be a thing for them, right? So that's the other piece of it, is just as part of the learning process.
I just recently with the Quest kids, we had the Mind Mazes competition with the Mousetraps cars at Skyview, and Ashlyn O'Hara and Jake Dye were both there taking photos, for the Clarion and for public radio. And I kind of was like, well, do you want to talk to the kids? And so we stayed for like an extra 45 minutes at the end, just so the kids could share, be interviewed. And oh my gosh, the fact that they're on the front page of the Clarion, and I got to like put that up, and they're like, look at Sammy, look at Noah. Oh my gosh, they were so psyched, and they were quoted, even just little simple quotes like that Jake had in his article. And so I think that Homer and Kenai, both areas, have like great opportunities for sharing, through beyond like the school's Facebook page or things like that. But thinking of that, how often do you have, I mean, like in the statewide artists pool, people who are doing things more with the literary arts beyond, I mean, theater, obviously you've mentioned, but like creative writing and poetry and stories, like narrative stories and interviewing elders and like tying that in with like their, I don't know, curious. That's my kind of obsession.
That is, literary arts is absolutely one of those disciplines we love to see, which can take a variety of sort of forms, right? From storytelling to, we see a lot of digital storytelling. I will say that as far as the current statewide teaching artist roster, and I'm in the process of, I'm about to sort of update that again here shortly. There are a lot of visual artists. There are a lot of kinds of visual art, right? There's a lot of media within that scope. We have fewer performing literary and media artists on the roster. So absolutely, that's something that we would look for. And I would say the more a teaching artist can build in ways to include community and place, kind of coming back to where we started this evening and what is culturally responsive, when a teaching artist comes into a community, ideally part of the reason that that's happening is because that teaching artist is interested in that community and in learning more about that community, right? And to the greatest extent possible, again, in a culturally respectful and responsive way, including community in that residency process, absolutely can create a really strong residency when people are doing a zine about their community as their sort of ultimate project over a period of 2 weeks, including the people who are there and the places of that community. Absolutely appropriate and wonderful and awesome.
We're coming toward the end of today's session, and the questions have been really great. I appreciate that you've asserted some really good questions, and I'm wondering, as we start to just talk about these final few slides, if others have had some questions that they'd like to share.
I do. I would be the in-school coordinator, and I'm halfway through the application, but I got to the part where you request the artist, and I know 2 years ago you had a list of a few pages of the bios to choose from. I didn't find that. Is there something like that to choose from, or do I have to go to the state list?
So we're trying to lean into the huge effort that Laura makes every couple years to update that state teaching artist roster called STAR and utilize the same thing instead of having a simultaneous but a little bit different version down here. We want to professionalize more of our local artists and help them get around the state. We want more of our schools to see what is available around the state that could come down to Homer. So the short answer is this state teaching artist roster is that place, as opposed to having a separate roster here through Bunnell. That said, there are sometimes local artists who have not gone through the trouble of getting on the state teaching artist roster and still have worked with us for years. So if you know of somebody, you could put that person, you could call and ask, is there anybody else in ceramics? Is there anybody else in writing? And maybe I can help you come up with some ideas. Mostly we just want to have a few options because sometimes people aren't available, they're traveling,
And from the statewide perspective, Julie, that's a great reason to send me an email. If you're not finding that on our website, send me an email, and I'll get you pointed in the right direction. And we can also talk it through, because in the same way, it's especially over the last few years, things have changed a lot for people and in people's lives, right? And it's also not everybody, as Asia said, not everybody wants to be on a teaching artist roster. But there are people working locally in Homer and in the near surrounding peninsula. So those are the other conversations is who do you know, and or who do Asia or I know that might be doing what it is that you're looking to do, right?
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes the most helpful thing is if you were to reach out and say, we'd really like to do something in pottery, or we want to do something with dance or music. And then it can just help me to go through who's in the state teaching artist roster and who doesn't want to get on that roster because they just don't want to be asked and say no by a school that's out of town. It's like they're busy.
Yeah.
But they'll show up.
Same. If there's something you're looking for, that's a great opportunity to just reach out and be like, this is what I'm trying to do, right?
Okay. Thank you. And just because everybody is sort of around Homer, I want to make sure that everybody knows about Michelle's sound healings on the third Tuesday of the month. They're really wonderful at 6:30.
That's great. Other questions that have come up so far before we just get into the last couple slides? Jim?
Can I ask a question about the roster as well? The one I'm seeing has like 40 or 39 artists listed on it. I mean, in a given academic year, are there that many residencies that take place? Does everyone on that roster kind of get something, or are we talking a quarter of those? Or and related to that is,
Yeah.
if I sort of get on the roster, how long am I on the roster for? Does it go? Do I have to reapply annually, or how does that work?
So once you've applied, and this is, I think, something that as it gets a little further into this series, certainly we can sort of talk more about, but in short answer, once you've applied and been adjudicated to be on the roster, you're on the roster until you tell me you don't want to be on the roster. Not everybody tells me they don't want to be on the roster. So there are still folks on the roster now who are probably not actively interested in doing teaching artist residencies. I will say that from the beginning in 2020, things were pretty challenging for teaching artist residencies, and they have not fully recovered. But this is why, going back to early in the presentation, that self-marketing piece is important, because there's also a lot of schools. I mean, how many principals have changed over? How many teachers have changed over who would be champions of artists in schools residencies in the state? They may or may not have any idea that programs like Bunnell's program as an independent artist in schools program or the statewide grant application exist. So the more you know, the more you can be an ambassador for both Bunnell's program and for these resources that are available to schools through the Alaska State Council on the Arts.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
In this reporting slide, I wanted to show you what we ask schools to talk about when they, or I want schools to understand what we ask teachers to talk about teaching artists in terms of how they experienced the residency. Did they have adequate lead time to prepare? This is a very simple survey, but these are things that like schools can really be thinking about in setting artists up for success. Was the teaching schedule clear and concise from setup to cleanup? Was there adequate time? What really is a correct number for the amount of admin time an artist puts into a residency? It's just very good to know and track and for us to understand. Laura talked about how much experience artists have. Sometimes they do put a lot of time in early, but all of that is an investment if you stick with the program that leads to like much more efficient residencies in the future. You have to believe that you're bushwhacking a kind of path, and then you'll be able to walk down that path more easily in the future. Did the artist approve the schedule before they were provided it? And then, just a bunch of different, very, hopefully very clear questions around how the artist was supported by the school liaison and things like the teacher's workshop, the room itself. Did it have good lighting? Was there good AV equipment? We want to know this too, because we want to make sure schools are meeting the artists, supportively. And finally, there's a little narrative page. Why it's good to see this ahead of time if you're an artist is to think about the planning, of course, the questions to ask, and what are some of the other critical things that we want to weave into a residency. They are things like art standards and cultural standards. And they're really, really, I guess I can't link to a link inside of the survey, unfortunately, but these are things that we can show you so that you can build these in, and we'll talk about them with respect to lesson planning, because they're so important in providing real depth and context for the lessons that you're teaching. So let me get out of here and back to our final slides. I love this slide so much. Imagine students making leather masks and painting them. Really one of the coolest residencies that happened for a few years running in Homer with Gail Baker. The schools report is just as big, if not much bigger than what the artist has to provide. They have to write letters to legislators and give us copies of them. They need to give us photos with photo releases and a statistical report form. We are really trying to make this easier for schools by providing sample letters, by doing fill-in forms that are online, and just trying to reduce the burden of time that's involved in supporting these residencies. And any input that in-school coordinators can give us about what works and doesn't work is really appreciated, because we want this program to move forward with great success. It's one of the most important things across Alaska in terms of advocating for funding the arts is what happens in schools, and artists in schools will always be a favorite thing for legislators who may question funding the arts. The soft spot is their hearts and their kids around what they get out of artists in schools. So there's it doesn't just benefit kids in schools. It has also like this reflective outward echoing effect that really strengthens the arts fiber overall to offer programs and to let legislators know how important they are. That is one of my favorite things that happened last year. The fabulous Anchor Point Elementary School, Chapman, and its principal Heidi Stokes, just an amazing principal, really dedicated to artists in schools. Had a huge student mural painting project with Charlene Klein, and this is just one of the many panels, super cute, where students are talking about what they love about living on Ketchimak Bay and Cook Inlet. And finally, payment. Just know that once your reports are in, teaching artist and artist reports at the conclusion of a residency, Bunnell will provide the payment. We actually invoice the Kenai Peninsula Borough for their portion of the payment, which schools are responsible for generating. They usually do it with their discretionary funds and having those at their specific account build out. Sometimes they do it with funds from a fall fundraiser, a PTO type of fundraiser, but you don't have to go to the school for your payment. Bunnell will take care of that, and it will happen as soon as your reporting is complete. It works a little differently at the state level.
It does. And that basically, when a teaching artist works with a school through the Artists in Schools program, ASCA does not pay the artist directly. Any contracting and any payment occurs between the grantee, the school, or coordinating organization like Bunnell, and the artist. That's one of the things that I can also help support, though, is to provide resources to make sure that all of that is literally and figuratively on paper, and that everybody is on the same page. And those are things that feed directly into an Artists in Schools grant application, is evidence of that clarity of understanding.
We're finishing up our presentation here, folks. You've stuck with us for at least 2 hours, and I hope that a few more of the 18 people who registered are able to attend next session, but this recording will be available So if there are things that you're reflecting on, things you're concerned about, questions you might have, you'll be able to go back through this. I guess one of our final slides is around reporting for artists. This is something we spoke about already, describe the activity that happened, opportunities and challenges that you faced. We're just really talking about a couple paragraphs. We're not trying to wear you out with the whole blow by blow. We want to get the summary description and any concerns or salient learnings that came out of that. And the photos, that's very important. Artists in schools do the craziest things. So Sterling Elementary had heaps of old chips of tiles in boxes sitting in some strange storage room, and they wanted to do mosaic. And if I were an artist, I would have really been frustrated to kind of like work with these odd bits and ends. But they reached out to us, and I surveyed artists who I knew are available locally and said, would anybody be interested in mosaic? And Charlene, I mentioned she was like this Shayla Dobson of the Anchorage area. They made these beautiful mosaics with these little ground up bits, and they're all over the school. It's just gorgeous. Here's our here's our funders, the biggest of which is the Alaska State Council on the Arts. And that funding is really the cornerstone of the Artists in the Schools program. Bunnell gets a grant between $13,000 and $15,000 for many years, and as a result is able to provide between 9 and 15 programs, depending on their length, across about 42 schools in this district. So it doesn't mean we provide 42 programs. It means we provide it to about the first dozen schools that reach out. It's unfortunate that more schools don't reach out. We work really hard to advocate, especially in rural and remote areas where there definitely aren't art teachers and there are fewer cultural exposures. And we wouldn't be able to do it without support from Kenai Fine Arts Center and Ulmer's Drug and Hardware and the Global Credit Union. Here's our last slide. You want to talk about sustaining the impact, Laura? It's so powerful. I love this image because of the concentric kind of lines that Deland builds out here to speak to impact.
But I think we've touched on some of these things, but this is the idea of what's the leave behind for a school, and what is the story we can tell after the residency that helps a school community come together and grow in a common identity, and helps people outside of the school, like from an advocacy perspective, really understand the impact that teaching artists and arts partners have in our schools across the state. I think the other thing just to sort of be aware of as you consider whether this is a direction you want to go or not in developing your practice, and I'm just going to say this from experience, for me, the experience of working with a teaching artist as a student, as a young person, when someone would come in to teach a residency, or I would have that arts experience, the memory of those things sort of helped to solidify all of the learning around it, right? And all of that year. And those are the things that stick in our memories as young people, is being able to connect with artists, again, through shared endeavor, makes being in school a really happy thing, which is good all the way around. And so I would just say thanks to all of you for considering whether this is a direction that you want to go, and for getting involved with Bunnell Street Art Center.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you all so much. I hope that this is just the beginning of a very meaningful relationship. Those who are training now to come on to teaching are a part of a wave that will revive the state teaching artist roster. We lost a lot of people in COVID. I don't necessarily mean that they passed, but maybe they just burned out, and it's just time to refresh and renew. And the various media that you all represent, especially in music, the freshness of that, the literary arts, the ongoing, ever important painters who come in and help schools to do things from murals to mosaics. It's very, very exciting. It's some of the most rewarding work that we do. So thank you, and looking forward to seeing you next week. Next Tuesday night, we're going to be talking about cultural competency. We'll have some very interesting, one of the through threads next week is shadow puppetry. We're talking about making culturally responsive lesson plans and working with greater sensitivity and inclusivity to Alaska's nuanced stories of identity across an extremely diverse state. And so we'll have a social studies specialist with third grade curriculum and high school curriculum. We'll be talking a little bit about Passages Alaska, which is a new indigenized arts integrated social studies curriculum that is using all art lessons to teach the great moments of Alaska's story. And so I'm excited. I hope to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet everybody. I look forward to next week.
Thanks all. Take care. Don't hesitate to follow up with email questions, anything like that. Those resources, they'll be available to you so you can just absorb this in the time that it takes. Good night.